and here's what I've come up with. I think picturing it as a globe is a really good way to get a good deep understanding, but I think some people are finding it quite hard to follow on with that and to use that in an exam situation where you've got a globe, drawing a globe, you don't have access to a globe, it's quite hard. So I'm starting to think now that we might want to move towards, and it's really up to you, but move towards some sort of understanding of doing each question with a rectangle. And that rectangle should be a representation of this in your mind. Now you don't have to draw the world map on this rectangle, but I would probably have this rectangle and draw a little dotted line down here, and I would call that 0, and somewhere up here I'd mark L for London or G for Greenwich. That's the centre of everything for these types of questions. Okay, a lot of questions we give you, and in fact the external exam will probably note somewhere in Queensland. That's what we like to do. So here's Brisbane, it's over here somewhere. And then you've got all the other countries, whatever it is that you need to work out. Now I know that Brisbane is plus 10 hours GMT. GMT is Greenwich Mean Time. That means that Brisbane is 10 hours ahead of London, of England. France and Spain, Spain in particular is almost directly south of England, but because it's on mainland Europe, it's put itself in that time zone. It's a government decision. This is all human construct. It's put itself in a time zone +1 GMT. So if Spain, which is here, is +1 and we are +10, that means that we are +9 from Spain. And this diagram really helps me to see that. Okay, equally, if we're talking about, say, here, which I'll say is New York, and New York is -6 from GMT, again, this diagram really helps me to build up an understanding of the fact that we are +16 from New York. 6 from New York to London, and then 10 from London to us. I can see that +16. If we're +16 from New York, and we go in the opposite direction, well, that means that New York is kind of +8 from us, but with the international date line, it's still, we're +16. New York is -16. Because when we cross over this point here, which is the IDT, the international date line, if we cross over in this direction, we lose a day. -24 hours. If we cross over in that direction, +24 hours. Now, again, some of you are grappling for this. What happens if we go left, this happens. If we go right, this happens. If we're in the northern hemisphere, we add this much. If we're in the southern hemisphere, we subtract. Grappling for that understanding through rules. And I was going to start like that. I actually wrote this title here, summary, and I was going to start a table because I think some of you would really like me to say, if this happens, this. I could tell you that. There's a 20% chance you'll memorise it and an 80% chance you probably won't. If you really desperately need that, develop it yourself and then come and ask me if it's right, and I'll tell you if it's right. And if you develop it yourself, if you put your mental brain power into developing it yourself, you've got more like an 80% chance of memorising it. If you really want that, do it yourself. But I'm telling you, you're probably going to be better off practicing drawing rectangles and using something like this in your exam. Equally, there's a couple of people have been asking me questions about 15B and distances to the North, South Pole and the equator. I can use my rectangle again to draw the equator, to mark my position. If I know my position is 25 degrees above the equator, so 25 degrees north, I can really easily in my rectangle work out that that's 65 degrees. I can really easily in my rectangle work out that it's 25 plus 90, which is 115 degrees from that position to the South Pole. All with just a really quick visual. So again, I completely understand that everybody in here is going to have a different way of approaching questions, a different way of studying, a different way of preparing. But I honestly think the best way to do this is to be able to draw a rectangle and apply that rectangle to solve problems. It'll save you memorising what is 20 or 30 variations to these questions. And then the other best way of doing things is to practice the variations. Now on that note, somebody in this classroom did, and I quote, say earlier, can I have some more of these questions? I think they're really fun. Okay, that was a Year 12 student. So on that note, can I just mention that you've got chapter reviews, but on top of chapter reviews, I've put some extra stuff from the Cambridge website on Passmark. It's there for you, access it, as well as your 5 practice exams. So access that stuff and use it. Once you've done the exercise in the textbook, it's probably time that you move away from exercises where you know what each question's asking you to do because it's in that exercise. You've got to go to those general mixed exercises, which are the chapter reviews, and even better yet, the practice exams. Okay? Lastly, let me finish with this example here, which is a more complicated example again, just because it adds this little bit of detail here. So Brisbane is on a longitude of that. We did question 1 earlier, and this is question 1 again, so it's just a copy thing there. But let's have a look at that second question, which is slightly different. A plane flies from Brisbane, which is GMT plus 10, to Zurich, which is GMT plus 1, departing 2 p.m. Monday local time and arriving 7 a.m. Monday Zurich time. How long was the plane in the air? Now again, this question is asking you to decipher a time, but it's not telling you which way it goes. So we're going to assume the shortest time, which may or may not include the international date line. So you've got to go through and understand that process. So what I am going to say is that if I draw a nice box, in that box I can put details of the information I have. So here's my London. Zurich, I know, you might not know this, but it doesn't really matter. I know Zurich is in Switzerland, which is pretty close to London, and I know that Zurich has got a plus 1 because the questions told me that. Brisbane's down here, which is a plus 10, and the fact that Brisbane is so far south of Zurich, it doesn't actually matter for me in this question. I want to find the time. I'm going to use it based on landing and departure times. So I depart here at 2 p.m. The time when I depart in Brisbane, it is 9 hours previous in Zurich. So I'm going to convert that Brisbane time back to Zurich time so I can find the difference between when I departed and when I landed, all in Zurich time. So 2 p.m. is 9 hours before. I can subtract 9 hours from 2 p.m. by adding 3 hours and changing the AM to a PM or PM to an AM, because that's the 12-hour relationship. So 2 p.m. minus 9 hours is 5 a.m. So the time here is 5 a.m. And it lands at 7 a.m. on Monday, and this is also Monday, so another bit of a wacky question, because it takes 2 hours to fly from Brisbane to Zurich. Just imagine that, 2 hours to fly from Brisbane to Zurich. And that's our calculation. It says departs at 2 p.m, which is 5 a.m. Zurich time. It lands at 7 a.m. Zurich time. The shortest way, because I'm in the Eastern Hemisphere for both, the shortest way is going to be directly west, just toward London, and that gives me my 2-hour gap. The exam questions do all come out with reasonable answers, just keep that in mind. On Friday, I want to do something with you, and that is, I have to be very careful because, yeah, I've got to be careful about what I teach you, make sure I cover everything, and then for the Unit 2 exam, I don't want to do a lot of stuff beyond what you need to know for the exam, sorry, the Unit 3 exam.